Have you ever wondered about the untold chapters of history, the ones that reveal a darker side beneath the surface? Join us as we shine a light on a significant period in Indonesia's past that often remains veiled in shadows. Indonesia has a long and varied past, but it's not all rainbows and happiness. The Dutch colonization of Indonesia showed a darker side of history that isn't often talked about. Prepare for a shocking trip back in time as we look at the terrible things the Dutch did in Indonesia. From taking advantage of people to killing them, the Dutch East India Company didn't mind using harsh methods to keep control of the archipelago. Get ready to learn about the bad parts of history and how colonialism in Indonesia has had long-lasting effects. When the Dutch first came to Indonesia in the 17th century, they saw the island as a way to get to the riches of Asia. The Dutch East India Company, or VOC, ran the spice trade and set up a monopoly that let them charge very high prices for cloves, nutmeg, and other valuable spices. But the VOC's greed and desire led them to take advantage of the resources and labor in the areas they ruled. This hurt the people and environment there very badly. The cultivation system, which was put in place in the 1830s, is one of the best-known examples of the bad side of Dutch colonialism. Farmers were driven by this system to grow large amounts of export crops like coffee, sugar, and indigo, which they had to sell to the Dutch at low costs. This method was very unfair to farmers because it made them work long hours in hard conditions while the Dutch kept the money. This caused a lot of people to be poor and hungry, and it also hurt traditional farming methods and the environment. The Dutch also used force and threats to keep control over Indonesia. From 1873 to 1904, the H-War was one of the bloodiest wars in Dutch colonial history. The Dutch used their better combat technology to stop the Acnees from fighting back. This caused tens of thousands of people to die. The Dutch also used forced labor to build things like roads, railroads, and harbors. Many of the people who worked on these projects died because of the hard conditions and diseases they caught. The Dutch also had a big effect on the society of Indonesia, which was often bad for the people who lived there. They forced their own culture and religion on the people who lived there, which led to the end of traditional beliefs and practices. The Dutch also set up a system of racial segregation that put people of different races into different groups and gave the Dutch and Eurasians special rights. Even though the Dutch said they brought culture to Indonesia, their colonial rule was very bad for the people and nature of the country. The misery of the Indonesian people was caused by the exploitation of resources and labor, the use of force and pressure, and the imposition of cultural and racial divisions. Indonesia wasn't able to break free from Dutch rule and start building a better future for its people until it got its freedom in 1945. The culture stem cell method, which was used to drive people to grow crops, is another example of the bad side of Dutch colonialism in Indonesia. Under this method, farmers had to grow goods like sugar, coffee, and indigo, which were chosen by the Dutch government on a fifth of their land. The government then bought these crops at low prices and sold them on the foreign market for better prices. The Dutch government got richer from this scheme, but the peasants were poor and unhappy because they couldn't grow enough food for themselves and their families. The Dutch colonial government also had a policy of discrimination based on race and ethnicity, which said that local Indonesians were not as good as the Dutch and other Europeans. Native Indonesians had less access to schooling, governmental power, and other resources because of laws made by the Dutch government. This strategy of discrimination led to a system of privilege and inequality that lasted for many years, even after Indonesia got its freedom. Also, the Dutch government put down any kind of pushback or challenge to their rule. They used violence to stop any revolts, uprisings, or other groups that attacked their power. One of the most famous cases of this was the H-War, in which the Dutch government led a cruel war against the Acnees people that killed tens of thousands of people. Indonesia and its people are still affected by the Dutch colonization of the country. We can't ignore or forget the terrible things that happened during this time. We need to recognize the bad parts of the past and learn from them. Under Dutch rule, Indonesians faced abuse, violence, and oppression. These things shaped the country's history and still have an effect on its society and culture today. As we move forward, it's important to recognize the harm that colonialism did and work towards making the world more fair and just. We can honor the past and open the way for a better future if we do this.